What happens when someone who's built their career on making connections, whether it's DJing at some of the world's most prestigious brands or speaking at European Parliament, decides to tackle one of healthcare's most pressing and underlooked issues? Today, I'm joined by Chelsea Leyland, the founder of Looney, a company revolutionizing women's health and wellness. Chelsea embodies what it means to transform vulnerability into advocacy, and we are so excited to chat with her today. Chelsea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into more of your work with Looney, I'd love to hear a little more about your personal journey. What did that look like for you, going from just, my periods are painful, to understanding that you had a true diagnosis or something more going on?
So for me, it started with painful periods. I remember I had about a year or two of a period that was somewhat normal, although, of course, you don't really have a sense of what a normal period looks like at that age. But for as long as I can really remember, I had extreme menstrual pain. So I would be lying on my bathroom floor with my face pressed against the cold floor, passing out, vomiting from the pain. And I think intuitively, I really felt that this wasn't normal. My periods were becoming increasingly more painful. And for the longest time, I kept going to my general practitioner, visiting my OB, and explaining that I was having these extremely uncomfortable periods. For the pain to get so bad that you're actually fainting and just, losing sort of any sense of reality. And I was repeatedly met with the same response, which, unfortunately for a lot of women with endometriosis, my story is not unique. And I waited for about 10 years to receive a diagnosis. I was hospitalized a handful of times. And there was just always this sort of sentiment of being met with a dismissed response of periods are painful. Your pain is normal. Periods should be painful. And this is just part of parcel of being a woman, of being someone who menstruates. And I kept saying, this cannot be normal, to be in this much pain. And eventually, my OB suggested that I might have this condition called endometriosis. And there was a procedure, a laparoscopic procedure, to see if I had endometriosis, but she didn't think that I had this condition.
Oh, interesting.
And lo and behold, I had a laparoscopic and I was diagnosed with endometriosis. And I think, it's important to say that living with that, any chronic condition or chronic pain is incredibly challenging. But I think that is really compounded by the fact that you're being told that your pain is normal and that there's nothing wrong with you. So I think that's when you really start to, doubt yourself. And I think that also really impacts your mental health. And the pain was very, very extreme that I think for many years I didn't actually notice all the other symptoms and comorbidities that, were coming with this condition. And I was just offered very limited solutions. I was offered the birth control, synthetic hormones. I was offered, if I didn't choose that option, quite extreme painkillers. And because I was already taking medication for my epilepsy, I didn't want to take synthetic hormones. And so instead, I chose to take very, very strong painkillers every month, which was not ideal. And I think also really impacted my gut health and digestion. Yeah. So that was kind of how it all begun.
Okay. Wow. It's so crazy to me because I'm sitting here so struck by you saying it took you 10 years to get a diagnosis, but actually statistically, on average, it takes women 10, and I'm sure you know this, it takes women 10 years to get a diagnosis with endometriosis. And I think so much of it is because of what you're saying. It's this feeling of you're going to the provider with pain, with symptoms, and you're just getting dismissed. And I think, we hear these statistics, but hearing it on an individual level and hearing what that feels like is so impactful, where I'm like, oh, that's crazy, but actually it's not that crazy. It's the reality.
I know. And I feel like that when we, connect with other, endo sufferers within the community, like I'm just, even though I experienced and I lived that myself, it's just so disheartening to hear how long it takes to diagnose, people. And when you're talking about pain that extreme, yeah, it's really challenging because I just think that you doubt your own pain threshold as well.
Right.
I used to take painkillers before going to sleep if I thought I was going to start my period in the night because I was just so afraid of waking up with the pain and then being hospitalized, or then finding myself, for hours lying on the bathroom floor.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, what I find really inspiring, though, is how you've been able to turn all of that into starting Looney and into building something better for other women with endometriosis. I'd love to hear a little more about how your personal health experiences helped shape what you build at Looney.
Definitely. I think it starts with just this sheer lack of integrative solutions. I mentioned in my own experience, I was very much offered these two solutions before eventually suggesting that I might have this laparoscopic procedure and this surgery, which, I also forgot to mention that unfortunately for me, didn't bring about that much relief. I had about 6 months of lessened pain, and then it came back with vengeance. So that's really was the catalyst, I think, for this deep journey to find healing. That's where it started. Before, starting as an entrepreneur and wanting to start Looney, it was just this desire to understand my body, and feeling somewhat let down by conventional medicine. It felt that it failed me, that those solutions just weren't good enough. And then I began working with different practitioners. So I started working with a TCM practitioner, traditional Chinese medicine, working with acupuncture, Chinese herbs. I also started working with a nutritionist, starting to understand how, my diet and my nutrition could actually help with supporting with this condition. So, avoiding inflammatory foods, for example. Also, working on pelvic floor therapy, healing, the toll that it takes on your mental health living with chronic pain is really, really extreme. And I was also taking many different supplements. I was working with different botanicals, and it just felt that there was a real gaping hole in terms of an integrative approach to care, and products that were really catering to a lot of these issues within women's health. And so that's sort of how it started. And we started working with, our now incredible medical advisory team. Looney is a hormonal health and wellness company on a mission to elevate the menstrual cycle and demystify hormonal health. And it started with our hormonal support balance beam supplement, and working with clinicians who really came about from different angles, really focusing on that holistic approach. So we work with an OB who's also a pain specialist. We work with a physician who specializes in reproductive health, who's also a clinical herbalist as well. We have an OB who's board certified in functional medicine. And I think it just came from years of just feeling it was either conventional medicine or these were like solutions that were really sort of fit into a woo-woo wellness box. Or they were just, tips and advice that wasn't really based in it was all anecdotal. I was finding online. So that's where we began to develop these clinically formulated products to help support women with their cycles. And we started off with some extensive consumer research, which guided our initial product, which was to support low mood. And then conducting a clinical study so that we actually had clinical data to prove efficacy of the product. And that was the start of Looney.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm just like nodding along here the whole time because everything you're saying actually is a lot of what brought me to building Allara as well. Was I always say I was just a frustrated patient. Like that was it. I was just a frustrated patient who felt like I needed something better. And if I needed something better, probably other people did too. And kind of like what you were saying, what really struck me was I kind of felt like I had to choose between like traditional medicine or more holistic or like functional medicine or lifestyle changes. And so that's why from day one, we've had doctors as well as nutritionists on our platform, because I completely agree. You need a place that kind of brings it all together. You need things like supplements or things that don't just fit into like one box or another. And I agree. I think that's been so missing in healthcare.
Tremendously so. Yeah. And it's always interesting to see that, the companies and the platforms that are really changing it, often you look at the founder and those are our founders, or they're physicians, or they're the scientists who are leading the research, who actually experienced a lot of these conditions or these issues firsthand. And it's sad that it is taken that to really change things. But, you know, I mean, that's why I found your story so inspiring. And I remember the first time I heard you speak, because it's people who have really, really suffered firsthand who are saying like, this can't continue anymore.
Yeah.
You know, women weren't required to be in clinical trials until I think 1993.
Yes, 1993. It's crazy. And still, there's so little research. I mean, we still have so much of a ways to go.
We were considered just smaller men, is that right?
Yes. Just like little men, let alone like all of the hormonal differences, the fact that our bodies change every single month, throughout the month. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if I had found a platform like Allara at the beginning of my journey, I think it would have looked tremendously different. Having to work with so many different practitioners, you know, how much that costs and the financial burden of that.
And the mental and emotional burden, right? Of like, okay, I got to figure this all out and like track everything on my own. I mean, it's really terrible. So yeah, I just completely relate to everything you've been saying. I think something that's, you know, really struck me about how you've talked about your work is how much you talk about kind of vulnerability being part of your ethos. And I think especially for these conditions we're talking about, like endometriosis, PCOS, just hormonal health in general, it can feel, I think at least it has been for me, like it can feel really isolating. It can feel shameful. How do you kind of encourage women in your community to share their stories, to embrace their vulnerability, and to embrace them in a way that's maybe a little less shameful for themselves?
I love this question because community really is the heartbeat of Looney. I know that community is so often now a buzzword that's thrown around, but community is the heartbeat of the company. I set up a community actually separately from Looney originally, which ended up becoming our Looney community to support women on their or with their journeys and struggles and the life. Can I start that again?
Yeah, he'll edit.
I love that you asked me that question because community really sits at the heart of Looney. I personally started this community separately to Looney, and it was really stemmed from my journey with endometriosis and my struggle with fertility. And I think anyone who is dealing with a chronic condition like endometriosis, like PMDD, PCOS, fibroids, fertility issues, trying to conceive, it is all consuming and it is such an isolating journey. And what starting this community taught me is the power of vulnerability. For me to sit there and say, I know what it feels like to live in fear of your next period because the pain is so intense. I know what it's like to feel deeply low after visiting a doctor because you feel that your pain is dismissed. I know what it feels like to lose multiple babies, which was very much, you know, the catalyst for starting this community because I was on this journey trying to conceive. You know, I had a ectopic pregnancy followed by a miscarriage, and it was all I could think about. And I really wanted just to connect with other people who were on a similar journey. So started this community, which is now our Looney community, and it's broken out into different subgroups. So we have a group for women trying to conceive, for those who are experiencing pregnancy loss, a chronic conditions group, a pregnancy and mum group. And it really is just that power of vulnerability, of getting support from people. And I think, you know, we achieved that with kind of a top-down approach. So it started with, you know, myself, and it has just grown into this incredibly supportive space. It's so nice for crowdsourcing information. For example, somebody might be about to schedule, you know, a laparoscopic, and they want to do some due diligence on their surgeon. Really great that they can just ask in the community and get that. And I think to your point, in terms of all of the dots that so often need connecting in terms of, you know, have you seen a pelvic floor therapist? Have you seen a nutritionist? It's really just, you know, asking a community that you trust with support. And also, I think, you know, learning to advocate for yourself as well. And I think learning to advocate for yourself is a skill that can be taught. And I think we teach that within our community.
Yeah. I think that is so important what you're saying. Advocating for yourself is, you know, one of the most important things. I think to your point of your story, even your diagnosis story, right? It was you continuing to advocate for yourself that helped get you that diagnosis. What is advice you have for women, especially women dealing with, potentially endometriosis, painful periods, symptoms they can't explain? What's some advice you might have for them for advocating for themselves?
So I think, community, we just touched upon that, finding a community that can support, hold your hand through learning to advocate for yourself. So that might be, preparing the right questions, preparing yourself so that when you walk into the doctors, you know what tests to ask for as well. I think that it can be incredibly helpful. I think in terms of learning to advocate for yourself, a second opinion is always great if you don't feel that you're in the right hands. I think trusting yourself, making sure that you're working with physicians who are listening to you as the patient. They aren't just telling you something, but they're actually listening to you. I also think in terms of advocating for yourself, trusting yourself. I think a lot of the time as women, we've been taught not to trust ourselves. This happened to me when I had an ectopic. I went into hospital. I was dismissed, but I knew intuitively that something was wrong. And so I think learning to trust yourself, which again, I think community can really help to support that, is a big one when it comes to learning to advocate for yourself. Taking someone with you to an appointment as well for support can be fantastic.
Yeah, and also second set of ears of like, did that come across to you? Like the way it came across to me, was that dismissive to you too? Like, I think that's such a good call. I know you've talked a lot about this, but I think people don't always realize kind of the broader implications of conditions like endometriosis. So, I think sometimes, for example, it's just painful periods, like it's just pain, but there are other implications like, fertility challenges, which you've talked about. Could you share a little more about some of the other implications of endometriosis, whether it's fertility, mental health, or other things you might have experienced or your community experiences?
I think it's important when we talk about endometriosis to remember it's an inflammatory condition.
Yeah.
When I was diagnosed with endometriosis, I was told that it was a condition whereby tissue similar to the lining of the uterus grew outside of the uterus. There wasn't a conversation about the fact that it could grow in other areas of the body. Endometriosis can impact your mental health, I think. Most importantly, it can result in extremely painful periods. Estrogen dominance can cause a lot of issues as well with regards to mood, digestion, skin breakouts. Fatigue is a huge one. It can impact your sleep, body aches. I mean, fertility. It really is a condition that impacts your whole body. And I think that having these conversations around these topics that have unfortunately been taboo for so long is how we educate people. So I think one of the biggest issues with endometriosis, apart from, doctors historically gaslighting patients and their pain being dismissed, is that patients themselves don't feel confident to speak up and even go to the doctor and say, I think something's wrong with me, because we have normalized pain for women.
Right.
So they're not even, they don't even think that their issues are extreme enough to validate them going to the doctor and speaking about it in the first place. So I think, conversations like we're having today, conversations that are happening in the community, the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, just the fact that we're talking about it is how we educate people. Because then sometimes, you might be sitting next to someone, who at a dinner who talks about the fact that they get such extremely painful periods, have done their whole life, pass out and vomit. And someone who's just had a conversation recently about endometriosis might say, oh, I've just learned about this condition, endometriosis. Do you think you might have it? And that's how it starts.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think people, especially, people like you who have voices, being able to share that, because I think you never know, somebody might be experiencing those symptoms and then they hear your story or they hear someone's story and they say, oh, that kind of sounds like what I'm going through. Like maybe I should look into that. I think to your point, it's so powerful as women being able to share our experiences makes such a difference.
Definitely.
Can you share a little more about where you are with your endometriosis journey today? And what are some things that have kind of helped you get to a better place? I imagine Looney is probably one piece of it, but would love to hear about some tips or some things that have really worked for you through your journey.
So at Looney, we always talk about the fact that we help people establish a toolbox to managing their hormonal health. Looney's Balance Beam hormonal support supplement is an incredible formula that can help support hormonal health. So it's a blend of adaptogens like ashwagandha, vitamins, minerals, and nootropics, 5-HTP, a serotonin precursor, really supportive for mood. We've got ingredients like L-theanine, again, really supportive for stress and mood. That exists as a tool in the toolbox. Magnesium is another supplement that I use that I would be lost without. Helps me as a muscle relaxant, really helpful for endometriosis, helps me with my process of elimination, making sure you have a daily bowel movement, really, really important when you have endometriosis. Community, making sure that I feel supported on days that are challenging. As I mentioned before, community with issues like around pregnancy loss, just an incredible space for learning. I'm always, always learning from our community. Our community has also helped us, drive product development, understanding these different pain points and trying to solve for them. Sleep hygiene, that's a huge one. Stress, stress is really hard to manage. We always encourage people to adopt a mindfulness practice. That might be yoga, that might be meditation, that might be breath work, that might just be trying to have a bath on a day that you feel stressed. Diet, nutrition, anti-inflammatory diet, incorporating specific foods into your diet, understanding your cycle, so tracking your cycle, starting to understand how you feel at different stages of your cycle, movement as well, making sure that you're moving and you're exercising, cycle syncing, so making sure that you're not going for a 5-mile run 2 days before your bleed, for example. You're prioritizing softer movement. So I think it's everybody's toolbox looks a little different. It's hard to be a little Miss Perfect and tick all the boxes, but it's just establishing, what are the key things that are really, really help me. Flax seeds, for example, is one of my top 5 in my toolbox. I incorporate flax seeds into my cooking and my food. Really helpful when I'm in my luteal phase because, again, just helps me with that process of elimination. So I think there are many different tools, but it's really starting to establish what your toolbox looks like.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I feel like you just gave so many ideas for so many tools, but I agree. I always say look, I have a really busy life. I'm stressed. You cannot hit it on every single angle. It's about 1, picking a few that are manageable, and 2, I think also giving yourself grace of you're not going to get every single one. You are still going to have some stress, and it's okay.
Totally. I think that's oftentimes an issue with the conversation in wellness is it sort of promotes this we all have to be these little Miss Perfect walking around, but the reality is we live stressful lives and it's tough. So I think it's just trying to do your absolute best. And I think, for example, I am somebody that can't eliminate sugar from my diet or alcohol, but, I might decide, okay, well, on Friday night, I know I want to have 2 glasses of wine. So I'm going to eat really well and be as clean as I can until Friday. So it's just picking, for example, you might be somebody that loves to wear fragrance. That fragrance has endocrine disrupting chemicals in, but can you maybe just wear it when you're going out instead of wearing it every day? It's just making little adjustments and little tweaks and just remembering that none of us are perfect and we just have to kind of do our best. And I think when you're having a flare up, for example, with endometriosis, then you might want to be a little bit more mindful about your lifestyle and how, you're going about your day.
Yeah, such great advice. I'd love to do a few kind of quick rapid fire questions before we wrap up. What's one thing you wish every healthcare provider knew about endometriosis?
I'd say the impact and the toll that it can take on your mental health.
Really important. I think we forget about mental health is a part of healthcare. I totally agree. For someone who just got diagnosed with endometriosis, what's the first step that you would tell them to take to feel a little more in control?
I would start with finding a community who can support you and finding a physician who you trust, who is listening to you, who wants to work with you from an integrative approach.
Yeah. What gives you the most hope about the future of reproductive health care?
I think that there are women and founders like us, women who are leading the research, who are pushing for change, who understand these issues that we're trying to solve for firsthand. And there's empathy in the businesses they're building. It isn't just about how to make another buck. It's also leading from experience.
Yeah. I know. I feel like every conversation I have with a female founder, I'm like, yes, okay. We're doing it. It's getting better. Last one. What is next for Looney and your advocacy work?
Next for Looney and our advocacy work, we are constantly growing our community. We've started doing Looney sessions. So we're doing educational events within our virtual community. We are launching our second product next month, which is called The Rub, and it's a topical product to help support breast, belly, and back tenderness. And we are also about to roll out into national retail as well, which is very exciting.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Chelsea, thank you so much for spending time with me. This has been such an incredible conversation. I think what I am most struck by is how you've been able to take this personal journey, which oftentimes was very painful and tough, and turn it into really, a movement and a community for so many other women. And I know I am leaving this so inspired and feeling just better about the future of women's health.
Thank you so much for having me.
For anyone who'd like to learn more, you can follow my.looney on social channels as well as at Chelsea Leyland to follow more of Chelsea's journey. Chelsea, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And as a reminder, you can find out more about Allara Health at Allara Health on Instagram and TikTok and allarahealth.com.